Moving to the next segment, we're talking about key transferable skills that we feel the education sector really values. So even if you're not from the education space or you haven't worked as an educator in the past, what are some skill sets which as recruiters we feel stand out in your resume, stand out in your work experience, which can help us and the organizations, hiring organizations, understand, see you as a good fit to their role and a good fit, good addition to their organization. Communication and interpersonal skills remain at the top of the transferable skills. Someone who can speak confidently, someone who can talk about the work, the impact out there in the forums, someone who can understand it, but also then communicate it to the larger set of people, stakeholders is something that we've seen create a very, very strong impact in the applications. Problem solving skills, yes, of course. If you've worked on a different problem or a different thematic area and you see how the skills that you've picked up or the way your mind is oriented to solve these problems can work in the education sector, I think, and I think all TA professionals would agree that this makes a great case for why do you want to pivot into the education sector. Stakeholder management remains another very important transferable skill. Education sector or the problems that the thematic area requires to be solved for requires a lot of stakeholder engagement and a lot of stakeholder collaboration. So if someone has experience of managing a diverse variety of stakeholders in the past, primarily in the government space, but also in the larger space of education, build partnerships, speak in forums again where stakeholders are involved, great skill set to have. Project management skills. If you've managed a large scale project or a project which involves diverse set of either people or problems, this works very, very, very well in the education sector too. Does not have to be a project in the education space, could be in related areas like livelihood, gender equality, climate sustainability works well too. Capacity building and facilitation is slightly on the lower part of this list because we've realized that not a lot of people would have done it, but if you've done it, it's an added plus plus in the education space. Training, large scale facilitation, speaking in a large group, and the ability to capacity build, transfer your knowledge to a bigger segment is something again which the education sector values. If you've done it before in a program which is related to the education space or with kids, it's a plus plus. Otherwise, also it's good. Research and data orientation is a skill which we feel that the education sector and the social impact sector in general needs and values a lot. So the way you approach your research, the way you're able to analyze data, the way you're able to present this data, again, in a large group setup to talk about meaningful issues and solutions to the stakeholders will always be valued. Does not matter if you've done it in the space of education or another thematic area. If you're able to talk about this skill set, or if you have a certification to bank upon, research and data orientation too is a great transferable skill to help you pivot into the education space. So this slide is something which we created to help everyone in this room understand how specific skills and generalist skills can fit into the larger gambit of roles that exist into the education system. So the first circle, which is closer to the core of the circle, talks about roles, and these are actual roles that we have worked on at Arthan within the education space, which require or demand specific subject matter expertise. So roles which revolve around curriculum development, roles which revolve around leading a program like foundational literacy and numeracy, roles which require a leadership approach towards ranking and accreditations or curriculum development and assessments are specific and will always value candidates who have done a similar kind of a work in the past. And this is smaller in nature. The number of roles that come are lesser in quantum, but are more specific. As we move to the other segment, to the second segment, which is program and management skills, these are largely roles which would require and focus on programmatic generalist managerial skills. Roles like head of academics, head of operations, dean of school management, school program coordinators, program managers, senior program managers, program leads. These are, while they are in the education sector and maybe working towards kids as beneficiaries, but highly value candidates or applicants who have worked in other thematic areas as well. Because the key competency or the core requirement for this is very strong programmatic or management skill. Finally, the functional skill part of the circle talks about highly generalist roles like fundraising partnerships, HRBP, VP, AVP sales, finance and accounting, senior manager impact assessments. These are roles which are always open in the education sector. At Arthan, we have a plethora of them all the time. And they are the ones which require the least experience in the education sector. These roles are very, very functional, expertise heavy, which means that if you worked on sales, if you worked in as an HR, if you worked in finance and accounting, irrespective of the thematic or even the development sector, as long as you're able to pour your passion and have a very strong why do you want to do it for an education sector organization, plus are able to show your expertise in these functional skill sets, these roles are very open to accommodating candidates who are not from the sector as well. So just to sum it up, as we move away from the core of the circle, the requirement to be from the development space or the education space reduces, and the ability for us to speak or have more diverse candidates from outside the education or the impact space increases. So this was a question we had a very fun time curating the answer for. And I have a 3-point recommendation here. And this is open to other pointers as well. So I'm going to leave Ankita to add more to this. We feel that the first thing which helps here is creating a personal brand. Now, your personal brand has to be something which is largely uniform and widely recognized. It's a perception of you or an impression of you that is carried out in the world, even by people who have never interacted with you. So this will primarily be based on your expertise, your competency, your actions, and some of the achievements that you have within a community or industry or a larger market space. And this may be modified and definitely can be tweaked as you go forward. Having a personal brand is very important because that also helps us understand you as a person, what you stand for, how do people think of you, and what is the immediate impact that you are working towards building. So we highly recommend that use social media forums, use communities like EquiLead and other small group setups to talk about what you stand for, what you're passionate about, what is the value system that you really care about. Talk about it, create it, speak about it over and over again. And this definitely helps in getting some sort of visibility. The second one is something that we were speaking about just before this segment, which is sponsors versus mentors. We usually find a lot of mentors in our careers, people who can coach us, people who can help us navigate through challenging situations. But what we also need to look for as women is sponsors, people who can bank our work, people who can say, go out there in the world and say that, hey, hire this person, or hey, speak to this person because they are great at XYZ. So while we're focusing on building our personal brand, let's also think about who are some people who can act as our sponsors within the larger network, and who are people who can actually vouch with credibility. Make sure your sponsor themselves has some credibility, because that's how this works. Finally, the third point is speak about impact and not just activity. Whenever talking about your work, breaking it down for the larger public, always back it up with impact. This could be qualitative in nature. This could also be quantitative in nature, depending upon how you envision impact. While we have a lot of emphasis these days on social media platforms, and it is easier to do it on LinkedIn or other social media forums, be mindful of actual physical spaces where these things can come alive, where activities and impact can be spoken of more. Try to be someone who speaks about their work in speaker sessions, in community setups, in small focus groups too, while we are talking about our achievements and impact in the larger setups like LinkedIn and other social media platforms.
Leadership journey, at least my leadership and my path to leadership, hasn't been a straight climb. It's been a series of pivots. And I think some I chose, many I didn't. But, I feel women are more open to and conditioned to adapting and really sort of carrying that resilience within them to so I kind of adapted to fit myself into whatever life handed me. So I actually was a literature graduate doing communications and really ready to be a journalist, and was working with Indian Express and writing for Down to Earth magazine. So I thought my life is, it's going to be thriving in that. And I got married very early and became a mother very soon and very young in my life. And that's where I actually had to pivot, and I started teaching, just so that I could spend more time at home with my child, because I was also an ambitious mother. And that pivot actually lead to this journey in the education sector where I am, because I started my journey teaching with low resource community preschools to very high elite preschools. And those stark differences really spoke to me. And I think that belief, and that difference was, how it became my calling. So the gap in, what children receive isn't about resources, it's about belief, I think. So that's where I started that path to really, walking that path into the education sector. It also connected very deeply with my own ambition as a young mother. That support I sought, the environment I wanted for my child is what I thought everybody, every child deserved, and I wanted to work towards it. And I think, and along the way, I kept seeking out people who inspired me. Sometimes to follow their example, and other times to take something particularly that I liked in somebody and I sort of crafted to make it my own. So I think, some quality that I admired in a leader, I worked with it and made it my own. So that constant learning, the constant fodder shaped me who I am today, leading an organization with a mission that really so closely aligns with mine. I continue to study, I continue to sort of go back to my roots, uh, making my foundation strong within early childhood development on how I can actually. So I went back to school to study more about early childhood education, but along the way, continued to connect with people whose journey inspired me, whose work inspired me, and I continued to learn and unlearn along the way. But I felt like even when you're adapting to different things, even when you're pivoting, I think you can do it without disappearing and without really losing your voice of what you stand for, where you are, and continue to find your ground. I think now, from there to being where I am today, from classrooms to becoming CEO at Dost Education, I think what really kept me very steady is being responsible and being responsive to people, being responsive to situation, and being responsive to the mission that I stand for, and keeping that vision steady with my, because that started somewhere when I became a young mother at 22 till now when I have a 25-year-old son. That really, that vision has never sort of moved for me. I continue to adapt to different circumstances and situation, continue to equip myself with some of these key skills that help me study, but continue to find my inspiration as well.
As somebody, as a leader and as a CEO right now, looking back, do you think, oh, maybe I could have, this would have worked differently, or maybe this would have really worked out better if I would have done this? And the same kind of advice you would like to give to people in the room right now. So just specific roadblocks, and how did you mitigate them? What are the solutions that you think other people could also think of?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it's a multifaceted question. I think multi-pronged approaches to it. Of course, I completely believe in play being a child's right, and how do you really make that a reality, considering it just very quickly vanishes as soon as scarcity hits any family. So how do you talk about play to a family which is struggling to earn, bread? Or how do you talk about play to a family who is struggling with so many challenges the life is throwing at them? So, play at that time becomes a luxury because it just uh, parents, caregivers, environment around is not supportive of that, and then they start feeling, oh, you're talking about play to us when we don't have the mental bandwidth. And it's more often than not about the mental bandwidth. It's not about resources, like I said. It's, a child can learn from everything and nothing around their around their environment. If I'm playing with a child and I just kind of make a story, I know that the child will end up learning just some new words or something new, maybe just to repeat a sentence. This is what we at Dost also believe in. There are multiple challenges along the way. I think if you're talking about what women in these leadership roles, working in the education space or working within the social impact sector, really face as they look towards solving some of these big problems, I think it would be that sometimes we romanticize the change that we want to see. Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes we just have to accept the reality that is, respect the reality of who we are trying to work for and what is their reality, and work with them instead of actually looking at, okay, what are some of the best strategies, what are some global evidence that is present there. We all have that, we are informed by it, but we not necessarily can replicate it in the same fashion. We have to look at our context and sometimes have to go and make those parents and make those Anganwadi workers or Asha workers or our frontline women our partners, instead of us seeking that partnership from, from the academia, from the intellectual bandwidth. Sometimes the best ideas come from there, I believe. So I think one of the thing is that has really helped me is go to the field, understand, spend some time there, and really that's where the best knowledge comes from. That's where you feel most connected with the cause that you are supporting, and you find that some of the best solutions come from there. It may not come from the multiple books. I was handed over uh, and this happened actually. I was handed over many leadership books when I joined, and I know that Janhvi is very aware of my journey. I was really handed over, but I realized that it's women don't always have to fit into that template of leadership. So you have to really define your own leadership style. People will tell you, oh, you can choose between being too tough or being too soft, but I think you can also create some of your own leadership styles. For me, it's being compassionate and really leading with clarity, care, and compassion rather than being dictatorial or rather than being tough. I can be soft, I can be assertive too when the time demands. I can be a highly I can take risks, but I don't have to always kind of, scream. I don't have to have the loudest voice in the room to be able to be an emphatic leader. So I think there is never a template, even when you're solving for some of these big problems in social impact. Connect to the reality, understand the whole ecosystem that supports it. That's something that will always help. What are some of the things that will always help you? What are those key levers? And when you know the ecosystem where your influencers are, and the second most important thing that I actually feel is the having the right people around you who understand it, who are at your, with you, having the same vision, having the same kind of mental wavelength where you're able to bounce off ideas, but you also receive constructive feedback. You must always have. And I think we as women leaders should actually build that system of where we are able to, even as top leaders, are receiving qualitative feedback from our team. And even when you're at field, you're a program person or you're monitoring person, I think that really helps if you kind of nurture that environment where you're expressing yourself, but you're also allowing for good constructive feedback to come your way.